This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. This week we're celebrating a milestone here on NC Spin. This is the 600th episode of our show. There's only one other statewide talk show to ever have this many episodes, and that's UNCTV's NC People with Bill Friday. Well, last week we presented part one of our hour-long interview with Bill Friday, and this week we conclude that interview. We welcome you to this special show.
At the time, the Consolidated University consisted of three schools, UNC Chapel Hill, NC State, and what was then called Woman's College. When Gordon Gray decided that he was going to go back to Washington, D.C., they asked a 37-year-old Bill Friday to become president of this university. This was an incredible opportunity for such a young man, was it not?
It was also a terrifying thing in front of you, because I'd been in the president's office for 5 years as his assistant, and I knew where all the problems were, and I knew what had to be done in part. And it scared the daylights out of you, really. Those are very hard days. And
everybody talks about the 30 years you served as president of the university system. And quite candidly, they do so in glowing, beautiful terms about all that you accomplished in those 30 years. Those first 15 years were years of crisis for you. You had 4 major crises in the first 15 years of your presidency, which included a sports scandal, included the speaker ban law, included racial problems, and the reorganization of the university. And I want to talk about those for just a few minutes.
But you give me entirely too much credit, and there's a lot of people sitting right here in this room who were personally involved in every one of those things. And like Bob Jordan sitting over here, without whom none of I could have achieved some of those answers that were derived. But they were hard days, but everybody has hard days, Tom.
All right, so NC State had brought down Everett Case. Big-time college basketball came to State College. Now, Everett Case was a man who was always pushing the limits, always testing the rules and regulations. And in fact, there were a couple of times State got put on probation during his tenure here. Carolina, not to be denied, hired Frank McGuire, who proceeded to do somewhat the same thing. But it was a telephone call to your house one day by Lester Chambers that was the Wake County District Attorney at the time that changed this whole thing and turned it into a crisis. Tell us about it.
Well, Lester Chalmers he was then the district attorney. And he said, "I've got to see you." And he said, "I'll drive over to Chapel Hill right now." I said, "On Saturday morning?" He said, "Yeah." I went to my office. He came in, and he didn't beat around the bush. He said, "Last night, 2 gamblers stuck a gun in the stomach of these athletes saying, 'Give me back the money.'" I said, "Lester, what are you talking about?" There had actually been money passed bribing athletes, and it didn't work out apparently, and this was a real threat.
The athletes were to throw the game.
Yeah, and these men were really threatening them with a loaded gun. I said, "Well, what are you going to do about it? You're the solicitor." He said, "Well, I can't press the case right now, but I thought you'd better know." I said, "Well, Lester, I'm not going to fool around where the lives of people are concerned." So then I asked Bill Aycock and John Caldwell to sit down with me, and we spent the next 2 days literally looking at every ramification of this. And the only way, remember now that this was before there was any Final Four or Sweet 16, any of that.
Oh, it was more sacred than that. This was the Dixie Classic. Well, this was the tournament that everybody wanted to go to.
So we decided that you had to go to the root cause. And we took an oath among ourselves. We'd do nothing until the Board of Trustees met the next day. So we didn't say it was a board decision. This is an action of the administration. We did it. And I knew what it would do, and it set off a terrible controversy, but it was the right thing to do. And they had 2 sessions of the legislature where they tried to reinstate it, but goodwill prevailed. But now, you see, what happened over the years was that you moved from where we were in sports then until in 1989, and Father Hesburgh, who was then president of Notre Dame, and I talked, and we got with the people who owned the Knight Foundation. We said, there's a problem here. It's beginning to loom large. We better start looking at it. That led to 3 proposals: that the presidents be put back in charge of athletics or chancellor, that we have credible academic requirements, and that fiscal management be rearranged. We had listened to everybody in sport. Now, this was getting along fine until toward the end, the middle of the 90s, and big money moved into college sport. And this is where the real danger has set in. And we can go on if you want to talk further about this.
Well, I was going to say, our state has gotten involved in this in large measure when our legislature decided that they were going to grant in-state tuition to out-of-state athletes.
Now that, up to this hour, has cost the people $25 million.
Wow.
$25 million. When our governor says this week, we can't give the teachers any pay raise, we can't do anything for state employees, a series of can'ts and can't. My question is, why is this the public policy of North Carolina then, that we take that much money for people who are not the primary reason?
But it shows the power of big-time college athletics.
Well,
the money.
It shows that politics can get involved in it too, and did. 10 years ago, when the Knight Commission was meeting, Father Hesburgh and I came out with a plan to say if you didn't graduate 50%, you didn't get to play in the tournament. We hadn't gauged the impact of that recommendation. That year there would have only been 6 teams in the tournament. We all enjoy this and jest, but let me tell you what's happening here. There are students playing sports in college today that can't read at the 10th grade level. That's how far we have gone, you see. And this is where I think the problem really begins. It's the issue of the integrity of the institution itself. What are you trying to do here? When you have an admissions policy like that, on the one hand, and you don't admit anybody who's a non-athlete who doesn't score at least 1,100 on your SAT or whatever the cutoff point is. That's point one. But since money became the guiding factor in intercollegiate sports, and it is, all these other consequences have followed. You see, what we've done is move intercollegiate athletics into what is called the entertainment industry. That's what we're running. Now, that raises a whole lot of questions. Congress is asking the question right now, well, if you're going to do this, and you're going to make millions of dollars out of it, we should tax you. You have no right to claim the educational exemption as a nonprofit when you're making $10, $12 million a year selling athletic gear, whatever. But when you take the salary distortion, the admission standard variation, the graduation rates, playing games now 5 nights a week instead of 1 or 2, well, where in the world is this going to turn around? What's going to happen? Well, Congress is going to act. That's going to be point number one. I think they're really going to pursue this tax question before it gets too far. I think the players are going to say, well, wait a minute. The coaches are getting $6, $7 million. You're making all this money. What about us? And there's already a mention of setting up a trust fund that will be accumulated for these athletes when it's all over. Now, keep in mind that when all the playing days are over, 1 out of 100 of these young men and women make a living in sport. Yeah. So the question a university has to ask, I think, is what is our moral obligation if we take you in and use you up and then throw you out?
And what business are we in?
See, and one of the things that's got to happen is that the National Basketball Association's got to do what Major League Baseball and NFL do. You don't touch these children once they're in the universities until the end of the junior year.
Right.
Basketball is the only one that violates that. And we've now become the farm club system of the NBA. That's what we really are.
We'll be back with more in our interview with Bill Friday following these messages.
More and more government policy impacts agriculture. So how important is farmer involvement with Farm Bureau?
It's a necessity, and I appreciate being able to work together with an organization who's interested in protecting the rights of farmers.
From the mountains to the coast, representing all 100 counties, North Carolina Farm Bureau is the voice of agriculture. Farm Bureau and agriculture, we keep North Carolina growing.
Closed captioning of NC Spin is provided by Capital Bank, service worth talking about. Support for NC Spin is provided by AECOM, provider of professional technical and management support services to transportation, facilities, environmental, energy, water, and government. By Baker Roofing, providing the Southeast with roofing, siding, restoration, and waterproofing since 1915. By Farm Bureau, actively promoting farm and rural issues since 1936. And by Jordan Price Wall Gray Jones and Carlton, shaping law, building communities.
We now return to NC Spin.
It was June of 1963. The legislature had had a long session. The budget had been passed. The lawmakers were ready to go home. In the closing moments of that session, the leadership brought up to vote what became known as the Speaker Ban Law.
Well, I was sitting there, the telephone rang, and one of my friends who was in the legislature said, "You better get over here." I said, "What's wrong?" And he told me that it was up at the second. So I got Fred Weaver in the car, and we drove straight to Raleigh, and I walked in the lobby of the Sir Walter, and the late Hathaway Cross stopped me there and said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'll give you 2 guesses, Hathaway, and they don't count." And he said, "Well, you go back and run the institution. We'll take care of this." I said, "No, you don't." And we came within 1 vote of reversing that overnight.
Some people, Bill, think that this was done to discredit the university. Some people think it was sort of out of retaliation to you and to the administration for killing the Dixie Classic. There was also the movement, the concern, the worry about liberalism on our college campuses. What's your explanation for the reason why this was done?
A little bit of all those. But you're right, it was the only time I've ever seen the state of North Carolina act that way. But it was a submission of a piece of legislation with no notice, no hearing, no chance to be heard, no chance to contradict or put in any evidence. And it happened just like that. Now, it took 2 years and millions of dollars that should never have had to be spent. And the most embarrassing moment in my lifetime at the university was being there, standing there on that campus that day, that rock wall that borders Franklin Street, and over on this side were 4,000 students, and here were these 2 fellows standing there who weren't any threat to anybody.
Members of the Communist Party.
But they weren't any threat to anybody.
Right.
And a newspaper family boy, Paul Dixon, was in President's student body. And he came to see me and said, "This is what we're going to do." He said, "I want to keep you advised." He said, "I'm going to report to you." And McNeil Smith, who was an alumnus, filed a litigation. And everybody knew when we went into court. They recessed for about 10 minutes, declared null and void, and that ended it. Tom, I think experiences like that do something else. Adverse as it was, it taught everybody what freedom of speech really means. Because we have had people on that campus 10 times more controversial than either of those men would ever be. And no one raised a finger. Now, why be afraid of hearing free voices? This is what a university is for.
We'll have more of this special evening with Bill Friday in a moment. If you'd like to have your own copy of this hour-long interview, please call NC Spin at 919-832-1416 or email us at contactus@ncspin.com. These DVDs are $20 each, and $5 of each purchase will be donated to the Ida Howell Friday Faculty Development Fund at Meredith College. So call 832-1416 or contact us at ncspin.com.
SAS is proud to be #1 in Fortune magazine's best places to work. And we're proud to be based in North Carolina, the best place for business. SAS, the power to know.
Best way to know me is for you to meet the people who I've had the privilege to serve.
For him to just call me and say, I care. Tell me about your situation. What do you need?
Richard Burr fights for veterans. I know I am one.
Richard Burr will always hold a very special place in my family's hearts. He went to bat for us when we really needed someone to help.
A man of great integrity. Richard Burr is there for the veterans and their families.
If I need help, I'll call Senator Burr.
I'm Richard Burr, and Brooke and I approved this ad.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Let's hear more of this interview with Bill Friday.
The black student movement got very involved in campus politics and made 23 demands on the Chapel Hill administration. And all of a sudden, we have a situation going on. And you got thrown right in the middle of that.
Well, that was also all over the nation, Tom. Every college was going through this. The war, the Kent State episode. I never will forget, 8 of us had been to see President Nixon about something else in the university business. And we came back home, and Kent State happened the next night. And he immediately called us all back. And we went back in to talk with him about it. This was early on in his time, and it was amazing to me how distant any president is from what's actually happening there. And those were the days before Mr. Kissinger became very famous. And he came in and he sat down, and I just happened to be at the end of the table. He said, who should take over here? What should be done? Well, Alexander Hurd was sitting there, and he'd been dean of the graduate school at Chapel Hill. And I knew he understood that student expression is going to take that form. You needn't be afraid of it. Let students do what they want to do, and let them be heard. And Alex finally went to Washington, spent a year there, toning this whole business down. But those were the times when, again, you were very proud of the tradition at Chapel Hill, because we didn't fire a shot, we didn't stop a class, we didn't disrupt any ordinary functions that go on. But we had a wide open, bare-knuckle debate out in the middle of Polk Place that ran for 4 hours one afternoon.
And it wasn't just UNC Chapel Hill that had these experiences. UNC or NCA&T had similar experiences. UNC Charlotte had similar experiences.
You had to have faith in the process and the tradition, and you knew how committed young people were to what they were actually doing. They were exercising their right of free expression. Now, it isn't always going to be something you like, but until they start burning buildings or firing guns, you don't interfere with that.
Now, Bob Scott was governor during this time, and Bob Scott almost lit the fuse that blew the dynamite that set this into problems. He called the state militia out, and against your advice and against your judgment, and then later on declared that he was the one who resolved this crisis. And yet you kept quiet, knowing that really wasn't.
Well, I'm not interested in who gets the credit. I'm interested in the result. And I think that generation of young people left the university community very much committed to what this state really stands for: the right to speak your mind, the obligation you have to be a public servant, and get about your business. And this experience was indelibly driven into their whole way of being, and I think that way very constructive.
We hope you're enjoying this special interview with UNC President Emeritus Bill Friday, and we'll return with more in a moment.
Support for NC Spin is provided by the North Carolina Petroleum and Convenience Marketers, fueling North Carolina's future. by the North Carolina Sheriff's Association, working to strengthen professional law enforcement services to North Carolina. By Smith, Anderson, Blunt, Dorset, Mitchell, and Jernigan, representing organizations with local, state, national, and international interest. And by UNC Healthcare, furthering the teaching mission of the University of North Carolina while providing state-of-the-art patient care.
But even this wasn't your biggest challenge.
Well, what's coming next? That's wow.
Reorganization.
Oh, well.
This was a situation that went back to the 1950s. First of all, at the time when you were president, you told me you had a board of trustees that consisted of 100 people.
Yeah, you know, when I used to tell people, and I'd go to these meetings of presidents, and they'd say, "What? How?" And I said, "Wait a minute now." The first time I went to a board meeting, I looked out there, and there sat the head of every major banking system, every major industrial corporation in the state, the Grange, the Farm Bureau, the unions. And I said, boy, what a concentration of power. It was the most powerful body ever to exist in this state. And that's why they could do things. And they did things, whether I was in the way or not. They get it done. But the state was in that kind of mood then, Tom. It's not that's not the North Carolina of today at all. At that time, you had a university board of trustees, then you had all the other publicly supported institutions with independent boards. You had the Board of Higher Education, you had the community college system, and there was nowhere that any coordinated sense of direction was taking place for the benefit of the state. And this is why we all existed.
Talk about the Carlisle Commission. I've done some reading about this, and I'm trying to figure out what role did they play in all of this?
It was a body that really set the course. It chartered the expansion of the university. It chartered the development of the community college system, and it showed the relationship both had with the schools. A very constructive experience. Irvin Carlisle was a great North Carolinian and led that group to very positive work. It was the forerunner of what we have today. But in the beginning, I tried to argue for the fact that these three institutions should have started as colleges and then work your way to university status. But that was not to be.
Politics got involved.
Yes.
And you had some disagreements with Terry Sanford about it, very few, but some. But the real problem came again with your good friend Bob Scott.
Well, let us just say we had differences. But we worked it out.
Bob Scott in print called you a liar.
Well,
and you had the grace to be able to respond to that and the calm to be able to avoid conflict. How did you do that?
I knew who was going to win, so I didn't have to argue, Tom.
But we ended up with a system where this Board of Governors, these 32 members, are all appointed by the legislature. So it's become highly politicized.
The system that we had initially worked very well for the university. Then if you get too much politics into something, you're going to pay a price. You really do. Now it's worked itself out of that. But there's got to be a way of saying the people who serve on this board should have, in my view, should have at least demonstrated 10 years of extensive statewide public service. There's nothing personal in this. It's just a standard that I would require, because when you're dealing with a mechanism that affects every aspect of the life of the state, you need people who understand this. Tom, I tell you, the last day in the building there, we were sort of playing the game over. And they said, "What did you miss the most? What bothered you the most in this work?" I said, "Well, I tell you, I felt the absence of being with my children. I wanted to be there when they were growing up. I wanted to be a part of it." One of Jack's colleagues, a pretty enterprising reporter, called daughter Mary and said, "Mary, this is what your dad just said. What about it?" She said, "Well, that's just like dear old Dad. But to tell you the truth, there were times when we saw all of him we could stand." So that's how the work goes home with you.
I said at the beginning of the program, you have been North Carolina's great cheerleader. So I end this discussion with you by asking you, what's so great about North Carolina?
It's people. That's where you start. We are a mix of very interesting heritages, but as I've lived and worked in this state, Tom, for years, people don't come and complain to me. They want to know, what are we going to do next? Now, you don't hear this in many other parts of the United States.
Bill Friday, every era has one person who seems to be the identity, the epitome, the ideal for that era. You are that person.
Oh, no, Tom. I thought you were going to say Dean Smith.
No. We thank you for being with us today.
We hope you've enjoyed this special program with Bill Friday. Next week, we return to our regular format discussing issues of interest to North Carolina. For more information all week, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.